Okay, perfect. Thank you. And so to open this program, I'm Gretchen Mosher, and along with Steve Freeman, we co-chair the Professional Improvement Committee for the International Society for Agricultural Safety and Health. Steve, I'll let you introduce yourself. Steve is the senior person on this committee co-chairship, and then we'll get started. Yep, thanks for joining us.
Okay. I am pleased to have everybody here or people who are watching this later. We think that the abstract process is fairly straightforward, but we want to clarify any questions and make sure that everybody is on the same page, because the better abstracts we receive, the easier it is for the PI committee to go through them.
Exactly. And the better the conference is. Good abstracts makes a good conference. So Steve and I did not talk about who's going to talk on which slide, so I'm just going to keep talking and you can interrupt me or add if you see anything. So when you're starting to write an abstract, I think the first thing you can think about is the topic within the ISASH scope. The ISASH scope is a broad one and encompasses many of the topics that fall under agricultural safety and health. That includes safety on the farm, safety in the grain elevator, safety in the orchard, safety in the brewery, and safety in the vineyard, and among many other things. So the second thing is the topic sufficiently narrowed? Think about whether you can present something in the 15 minutes that you have, or in some cases, the 5 minutes that you have. Talk specifically about the problem you are addressing in your presentation. Think about the methodology. And remember that we don't necessarily need to hear every last detail of the methodology. We need to have an idea of what you did and how you can explain it so that we can understand it. And then finally, are the implications and the importance of the research findings or the topic communicated clearly and concisely so that we know why you did the work and why it was important. Within the ISASH organization, we have both research and program abstracts, and this year we're combining them into one category, but this is an unusual part of this conference is it has these program abstracts that are maybe not as classically research oriented as some others, and they talk about the program that you've been working through, what problem it addressed, and then what the implications have been for the audience that the program was intended for. If the work is a work in progress, your directive is to say what has been done and what's the next step. Steve, do you have anything else to add to this slide to supplement?
Yeah, I just think that this is kind of the abstract is really the summary of what you did and why it was important and why people in ISASH or people who attend the conference should be interested in your topic. So you're not trying to give us an entire paper. You're not trying to give us all the results. This is just kind of the preview.
Correct. As if you were writing something for a movie, like a movie preview when you go to a movie, right? And so the format of these ISASH abstracts, we'd like to see, and we will communicate mostly with what's called the corresponding author. If that corresponding author is not identified in the abstract, we will assume that it is the first author. So be thinking of that when you put that author order in the presentation. We need the presenting author, their affiliation, and their email. Other authors and their affiliations are helpful as well when you complete the form. And then the first section should be the purpose, the background, and the objectives of the research or the program that you're discussing. The second section should outline the methods and efforts that you took and undertook to complete the project. And then finally, the research results and or findings, or if you're talking about a work in progress, what you expect to find, what you expect to have at the end of the project. And then finally, the outcomes or application to the field of knowledge. So when you're formatting an abstract, these are the primary sections that you should have included. Can I move on? Okay.
Gretchen, I just have a quick question. Do you want to entertain questions as they come up kind of when you're on that slide, or would you rather have us hold them to the end?
Nope, go ahead and ask the question.
Okay. So the question I have is, if I'm doing research in progress, if it's a work in progress, there is obviously going to be a couple months between the time that we submit the abstract and the time that we actually do the presentation. So I am assuming that we can update the presentation itself with whatever progress has been made, even if it's different than the abstract. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay.
We generally will not go to each presentation and say, that's not what the abstract said. That, right? We're not super interested in catching you. And it's always a good idea. And I think a good positive thing for the project to be further along than you think it's going to be. That never happens to me as a researcher. So I would be very happy to entertain additional things, as long as you want it to stay kind of within that topic area. You don't want to, if you decide, and we do have this happen occasionally, where somebody says, you know what, I don't want to talk about this topic anymore, I'd rather talk in this area, that would require the submission of another abstract. And we have done that, you know, switched one out with another when possible, but we prefer to not do that if possible, particularly after the program is finalized.
Well, I was thinking
for the question.
Yeah, for instance, if somebody had a survey that's ongoing at the time that the abstract is due, and maybe the results aren't going to actually be in until after the abstract is due, but they do have them before they do the presentation.
Sure. Yeah, I think that would be entirely appropriate. So.
Yeah, and Marcia, I think that also is true for completed research. So we have some completed research where maybe all the data is collected, but you're still in the middle of the analysis, but the deadline for the abstract comes up. So again, the abstract doesn't need to tell us everything. It gives us that preview. Why is this important? Why is the ISASH audience going to be interested? And then, you know, we expect that as you're putting your presentation together, or as you're thinking about a selected, you know, doing a paper, that your analysis will be finalized, and maybe the conclusions are going to be slightly different than what you might have included in your abstract, and that's fine.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Some other formatting information that's helpful to us. As someone who does the majority of the communication with authors, I always appreciate a concise and descriptive title. I am not a big fan of 30 word titles and beyond, but I understand also that sometimes it takes a lot of words to describe a title. The more concise you can be and the more descriptive, so really think about the words you use when you write that title, because that is really what helps people decide whether they're going to go to your presentation at the conference, and also helps us to organize, us or whoever is doing the organization, the planning committee, to organize where they're going to put the presentation that you have submitted. So be thoughtful about that title. Be thinking about whether your presentation is going to be a 5-minute or a 15-minute presentation. We expect the abstracts to be approximately 500 words. They do not have to be 500 words by any means. If you can get the information across to us in less than 500 words, by all means, do that. And then when you attempt to submit the presentation, or the abstract, you'll go to the website, and you'll first thing need to do is to create an account. That doesn't take a huge amount of time, but it's a little bit like a watched pot boiling. When you want it to happen quickly, it's not going to. So leave yourself a little bit of time. Try not to wait till the very last minute to create that account. Even if you don't have the abstract written, go in and create the account. Make sure you remember your password, and then once you have the abstract written and read by all of your co-authors, then go ahead and upload it. I would suggest putting the abstract into a word processing program and then cutting and pasting that into the submission program. Then you'll have a copy of what you submitted, and be sure that you check the spelling on names, affiliations, and emails. I've had more than one situation where the email has been incorrect, and that makes it impossible to contact authors when your email is incorrect. And then finally, read it over one more time, and then hit the submit button, and you should get some type of an acknowledgement that we received it. We've had a few so far, and we receive an email every time you submit something. So if you get an acknowledgement, also know that it could go to your junk. So just, unless you have reason to believe that it does not submit, for example, if your computer freezes in the middle, there's no need to email us and ask us if we got it, because we might have. Sometimes the delay, we don't always control how these things happen online. So, but go ahead and submit it. And if you have a question, by all means, submit it the second time. But generally, the program will not allow you to submit it a second time if it went through successfully the first time. Questions, comments after this slide?
I will just add that there's nothing in the system that prevents you from submitting a second abstract. So you can submit, be done, and then go back in later and submit an entirely different one. And a couple of times we have received the same abstract twice because somebody thought that it didn't go through. But when the title's exactly the same and everything else is the same, we can figure that out.
Yep.
And we may reach out to people just to confirm what's happening. Did you actually mean to submit something different the second time and you just did a copy and paste error? But again, we will work with the authors to try to make sure that anything that is confusing to us gets clarified.
Correct.
Okay. So just to clarify then, you do welcome more than one submission from an organization or from an individual as long as it's on a different topic. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
We don't have a limit really of how many that you can submit. I know some conferences do. I think 3 is a good parameter. Like above that makes you wonder whether you need to have all those things submitted, but that's just my personal bias probably. So, but we do not have a limit on how many can be submitted. And for those of you who are new to ISASH, as I said earlier, this is a broad topic list, a lot of things that can be submitted. We very rarely have people submit things that are outside of the scope of ISASH, and we try to flag those before we go through the entire review process to let you know that this might not be the appropriate conference for this particular topic, but that is very rare. I think I've been in this position for maybe, I don't know, 5 years or more, and I can only think of once that we had to do that. So, but here are some topics. If you have a question about whether something fits into the scope of ISASH, Steve and I are happy to answer that as well. But if you're working in an ag safety center, your research most likely will fit. And we always welcome people that are outside of that framework of the NIOSH Safety and Health Centers. That's where Steve and I are both from, and I think it broadens the field appropriately, and we like that. So if you have a topic that falls off of this list or that falls outside of this list, by all means, if you think it's ag oriented, send it through. Any further comments, Steve?
No, I think that, the ISASH as an organization is extremely diverse. So we have researchers at the NIOSH centers, we have university faculty, we have public health nurses, we have Farm Bureau reps, we have a large, very diverse population that is somehow interested in agricultural and rural safety. So if your topic is of interest to that audience, we would like to see an abstract.
Absolutely. So before you submit, a few pointers on self-review. So did you explain what you will do, explain how you will do that, and summarize what you did at the end? If you think about good writing, I was taught, tell them what you're going to do, tell them what you did, and then tell them again what you did at the end. Whenever you write something to explain what has been done, and clearly focus on a single problem statement. I think one of the biggest challenges we see with abstracts is that you're trying to talk about everything. Really focus on, 1 or 2 objectives. Maybe trying to take a 15-minute presentation and address 4 research objectives can be really challenging. And then are the findings, again, as Steve said earlier, we don't need every bit of the findings. We need maybe a summary sentence or 2 that tell us what were the primary findings and how did they contribute to the field. Remember also that explaining important terms that you are using that may be unfamiliar to the general audience is important, but also remember that you don't have a lot of time to do that in the abstract. So you probably want to stick to a sentence or less to review and define terms that could be unfamiliar. And then finally, before you submit, think about if you were reading this from, away from your research area, think about what it contributes to the larger international safety and health, ag safety and health profession and the discipline. I just heard this the other day that the discipline is really the content, the knowledge, whereas the profession is the implementation of that knowledge. So think about both of those areas as you prepare to submit your abstracts. Sorry, Steve, I didn't ask you whether you had anything else to add there.
Well, I think that the only thing that I would add to this one is that when we are talking about these, we're normally talking about research type abstracts. But remember, if you're doing something different, that same structure exists even though you may not have any research results to present. And that's also part of ISASH. And if you have concerns, reach out to us in advance. We'll be happy to chat with you. But again, not everything that we do in ISASH is research.
We have a question in the chat box. And so Caleb wants to know, do we submit the abstract and the video together? What does that process look like? This is his first time submitting to this conference. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Caleb.
You want me to
No,
take
so first we submit the abstract comes first. We will communicate back to you how we accept, we'll accept, or we generally don't deny, but we do occasionally. So once you get that acceptance decision letter, we will tell you specifically how we want the presentation formatted for the conference. And then we'll give you the deadlines at that point and when we want them by and what format that we'd like them in and that type of thing. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, let me add that the format and the deadlines are in the call. So we ultimately will need the videos as MP4 files, and we'll set up a process to either have a place where you can download those or email them. We don't really care how we get them. Whatever's going to be most convenient for the presenter, we can likely deal with it. While we are in this kind of hybrid process of conferences, we are not necessarily limited by space. So it's much more likely that if it's a fit and it's written well, we can understand what you're talking about, we're going to have very few denials based on the abstracts. Once we go back to a physical conference, then there are space restrictions that the host committee will tell us. We only have so many spaces for oral presentations. We only have so many spaces in our hall for posters. Then the PI committee, since we have that information in advance, then we are also not only evaluating, but we're also doing some ranking to select the best abstracts for the conference. But in this virtual environment, the chances are if it fits within the scope of ISASH, it's likely that we're going to be accepting.
Correct. Any further questions on that? And so this is our last screen of information. A few additional tips for authors. So that communication will likely go to the person designated as the corresponding author. But if I remember correctly, last year, the program that I used to send those out sometimes includes all authors. So make sure that you tell the authors that are on your abstract that you've submitted something. I had several kind of not very pleasant emails from people last year that were like, I did not submit this. And it took me several days to track down exactly who had submitted it. And in fact, that their name was on there, right? So just make sure that people know that they're on these abstracts, and think carefully about having a whole bunch of authors. I think this is not a paper, this is a presentation, and 15 minutes means that people clearly that provided the funding or that were involved in the process. But I am not a big fan of 10-person papers because it takes a lot of typing on my end to get everything into the communication. We do not, given all those things I just said, we do not limit the number of authors on each presentation. However, I would say as a recommendation, 4 or less. We're not going to limit author numbers, but just be aware of that. Also, write very clearly, write concisely, cover the topic, but the presentation and information should be clear. And that means clear to someone outside of your field. And then how you decide to present these things, how you decide to present the information is a skill that is, I think, universally expected of researchers. You get to decide what's the most important thing about your research because it's yours. No one else can decide that for you, right? So that's your job as the researcher, is to tell us what you think the important things are that come out of your presentation. And Steve, if you've got something to add, I'll give you the floor now.
Yeah, again, I think the most important thing to be thinking about as you are preparing your abstract is to remember that this is essentially a copy and paste from your Word file or whatever word processor you're using into our system. So there was a time where we were using an online form where there were little boxes that you had to type into, and that worked really, really well for the people that were doing completed research. But it was very difficult for people who had programs or had other types of information that they wanted to share with the ISASH community to try to structure an abstract into those preconceived little boxes. So we made the decision multiple years ago to go away from that because our audience is diverse, our presenters are diverse, and while we still have some general guidelines of the information that somehow needs to be conveyed in the abstract, we really want you to present your abstract in the way that makes the most sense for what you want to talk about. So we no longer have the form. It's an open-ended process. So again, but if you have questions or concerns, we are always willing and glad to help.
Indeed, and we do look forward to receiving your ISASH abstracts, and we are happy to answer questions. I try to respond as promptly as I can. Sometimes during the day, I can't get to it. So I usually, if you don't hear from me within 12 hours, certainly by 24 hours, send it to me again for whatever reason. Sometimes emails are sent to junk mail for reasons known only to the IT gods. I don't know. My colleagues at the University of Iowa, for example, I don't know, her email always goes to my junk, despite the fact that she is a known address for me. So just be patient with us as we respond to your inquiries. We are doing the best we can, and we hope that you have some of your questions answered today. So with that, Steve, if you have anything else to add, I will stop sharing. And
yeah, I would just add once again that while Gretchen just asked you to be patient with us, if you don't hear back, send it again. So yeah, we are not intentionally ignoring anybody's email.
So just thank you both for a very helpful and very informative presentation. I do have another point of clarification or a question for you guys. And you did mention previously that what you're looking at first is just the abstract. So don't submit the videos, don't create the video, don't do anything until you hear that your abstract's been submitted. Once the abstract has been submitted, Steve, you mentioned an MP4 format. Do you have any preferences as far as what you want? Do you want a narrated PowerPoint? Do you want a recording of a Zoom meeting? You know, some people will do a Zoom of just themselves with their PowerPoint. You know, do you have any preferences as far as that goes?
For the presentations, we have no preferences. So last year, everybody that reached out to me with a question, my answer was always, whatever you are using internally to your organization that you know how to use that. So if it's Zoom, use Zoom. If you already know how to narrate PowerPoint, narrate PowerPoint. You know, I don't care if your face is in the corner. I don't care if it's just the PowerPoint slide with the voiceover. You know, it's whatever is going to be easiest for our membership and the other conference attendees to accomplish. The only time I would say that is not true is if it is a panel. So for the panel presentations, it's really nice to do something like this, where the participants can potentially share their screen and they get to see the panelists at the same time.
Great, thank you.
Are there any other questions at this point?
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is
Good
Guy. I'm
afternoon.
a grad student at UC Davis. I'm so sorry I missed the very beginning. Maybe you have already mentioned and I just happened to miss. Is there specific instructions as to the writing of the abstract? I mean, maximum number of words, characters, something like that?
The slides do specify that at the beginning of the presentation, about 500 words, but we're
Okay.
not super tight on that. Yeah,
Okay.
max, yeah, but we're
Is
not
there
going
a
to throw it out if
minimum,
it's, there is no minimum.
Okay. Good.
Enough to tell us your story
Right.
or
Okay.
summarize your story. Yeah,
If you
Fair
convey
point.
what we need to know, then we don't have a minimum.
correct.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
And I see there's a question in the chat
Sorry.
from Anna.
Jump in. I just wanted to add, if I may, for Guillermo, that the session is being recorded as well, and it'll be posted, so you'll be able to review anything that you've missed.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sandy.
Yep.
Appreciate
When
it.
you're trying to fall asleep at night, you can listen to this presentation, right? So the question is, how many abstracts do we typically see submitted? I think last year we had around 80-ish, did we not? In a more, so that was in 2020 during COVID year. In 2019, we had almost, I'm thinking it was closer to 140. It was craziness. And that was that's probably the high end of what we have submitted. And that includes posters, programs, you know, the whole 9 yards. Generally, we have around 60 oral presentation abstracts, and 60 is often how many slots we have to present. Between 60 and 64 is usually depending on how many presentation sessions in a physical conference where we're actually there face to face. But a lot of abstracts, and we have some automated help with getting back to you, but most of what we do is still fairly manual. So we plead for your patience. But as Steve said, if you don't hear from us, let us know that too. You will get something after we receive your abstract. It will probably come within 2 to 3 weeks of the abstract deadline that lets you know that in fact your abstract has been most likely accepted, and then we'll give you further directions at that point.
Right. And I think I would also like to add, for those of you that have been ISASH members for a while, if you are now watching this, this year, once again, we have one common deadline, because ultimately all of the things that we are accepting through the abstract process will be an MP4 file. Once we go back to a physical conference at some point in the future, we will have 2 deadlines once again. We'll have one deadline for the more traditional oral presentations and panels, those sorts of things. And then we will have a later deadline for the posters. But this year, since everything has to be pre-recorded in some form, there's just one deadline for us to deal with.
Other
Gretchen.
questions? Yes.
Gretchen, I had an opportunity to message Steve, but I didn't have an opportunity to message you. If you're okay with it, I'd like to create a topic session on IMN, the member network, and include PDF copies of your slides. If you're all right with that, then the people can actually go there and reference those as well as looking at the recording. Is that okay?
That's okay.
All
It's
right,
okay with me anyway. I assume it's okay with Steve as well. Anything else?
Marcia, let me just ask, I am not seeing the chat questions overall. So is there anything else in the chat that we need to try to answer while we're still here?
I am not seeing anything in my chat, but I know that the message that Gretchen just had, I didn't see in mine.
It came to me
to you.
directly. I didn't
Yeah.
notice that when I read it
Yeah.
until now. And Trevor, I saw your lips moving, but I could not hear a thing you were saying.
Yeah, we're not hearing you, Trevor.
little better?
Better. Yes.
There we go. New headset to me and not working that great apparently. So, all right. Quick question for you, and that is, I submitted my abstract earlier, and I heard you folks talking a few minutes ago about cut and paste from a Word program into the submission system. I had the opportunity to just straight upload my Word document, which was the abstract. And while we were talking, I've logged back in and I don't see it there. I don't see a place where I should have cut and pasted in. So I'm assuming it's there and it's all good, because I did receive a note that the system had received my submission.
And
or
I
could do it
received
again.
a similar note. Yeah, I received the note as well that it came through, and it
But
was a
did you
prompt for
get
me to
the-
create
was there an
my
attachment,
session.
or I mean, I didn't see a spot to cut and paste my information in. That's just a technical question maybe, but I just thought I would double check.
Yeah, we will check as well. Last year, about half of our abstracts were attachments, but there was an option to just type. And we indicated that our preference was an attachment, but we don't get to control that internal system. So maybe they took our advice and that's the way that it is this year. But last year that you could do either or. So you still had
That'd be
to
great
type
news
in
if they were only taking documents.
your information though,
Yeah,
right?
I got to plug back in. I can hardly hear a thing you're saying there, Stephen. So apparently it's a one-way system. I'll mute myself and then plug back in to hear your answer. Sorry.
Okay. All right, let me repeat that for you. If you can hear me, give me a thumbs up. All right. Last year, our system allowed both. You could upload a file or you could just type it into the system. We indicated that our preference was a file because then everybody controls exactly what it looks like. We were not told that they took our advice and that was our only option this year, but we can go in and check that. But you should have still had to type in your name and your email and your affiliation. Okay.
Are there other questions? Great. Well, thanks to everybody for coming out today and being part of this. And if you still have questions, by all means, contact us or log on to Mighty Networks and review the presentation again.
Thanks, Gretchen and Steve.
You're very welcome.
All
Have a
right.
great Monday.
Thanks, Gretchen and Steve. We appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, it is our pleasure. And again, if anybody has any questions, just reach out at any time.